Okay, so on Tuesday you all asked for some very specific things from me. You asked for a video on the airplane problem, a video on graphing, and a video on completing the square. So I've sort of just condensed it all into one video. So the first problem that I'm going to do here is the airplane problem. This is coming straight from your review. So we know that a charter flight charges a fare of $300 per person plus $25 per person for each unsold seat on the plane. If the plane holds 100 passengers and X represents the number of unsold seats, you're being asked to find an expression for the total revenue received for the flight. So what's tricky about this problem is what X is representing. Okay, so X is the number of unsold seats. Now what I do know is that it's a 100 passenger plane. So if I know that there's X unsold seats, then 100 minus X is what represents the number of sold seats. So that's what makes this a little bit tricky. So now let's go back to the beginning of the problem here. It says $300 per person. So that's per person who's actually purchased a ticket. So if we put that as an equation, that's going to become 300, and then the number of people who are actually on this plane is 100 minus X. So that's the first piece there. Then it says plus, okay, so we're going to go ahead and put my plus sign, $25 per person for each unsold seat. So that's a three-parter because we've got the $25 per person, so that's that 100 minus X per unsold seat. So we're going to actually break that down into three things. So I've got 25 per person, so that's the 100 minus X, for each unsold seat, which is X. So that's what makes this a quadratic. So then what you have to do is do a lot of distributing and cleaning up here. Okay, so that gives us 30,000 minus 300X. And then I've got distributing to the other piece, I've got plus 2,500, and it's X because I got to distribute the X that's sitting on this side also. And then minus 25X squared. Okay, this piece in here gets cleaned up. So we end up with 30,000 plus 2200X minus 25X squared. So I think from there you should be able to follow the answer key for the review. Because these questions here, when it asks about producing maximum revenue, remember back to class, that's your negative B over 2A. So I'm going to take the opposite of B. So there's B. Opposite of that is negative 2200 all over 2, and then A is negative 25. Okay, and so that's where the question here is coming from. And then you're going to take your answer and plug it back in to get that maximum revenue, which is done for you on the review answer key. So the trickiest piece is understanding where this equation came from. So all I did again is I broke down that first sentence. So hopefully that'll help you make better sense of the actual equation, so that if I changed it from $25 per person to $30 a person, it shouldn't matter. Or if it's $300 per person and maybe on the test it's $200 per person, that shouldn't matter. Let's go ahead and look at another problem. You also asked that I do some graphing with you. Okay, so this equation here is in vertex form, which we said makes it a little bit easier then to identify the vertex. So my vertex here is at the point 1, -3. So remember from class, I'm pulling that directly from vertex form. So to graph it, I'm going to look for the vertex. I'm going to ask you to write the axis of symmetry, which is always going to be x equals, okay? So if you don't put x equals on the test, I'm going to take points off. And then whatever the x-coordinate happens to be, which in this case is 1. Then I've got to find x-intercepts and y-intercepts. So let's start with the y-intercepts, because for those, I'm just going to let x equal 0. So that's just plugging in. So 0 minus 1 squared minus 3. So that's negative 1 squared minus 3, or 1 minus 3, which is negative 2. So 0, negative 2 is the y-intercept. Now the x-intercept is going to require a little bit more work because we're going to need to clean this up before we do anything else. So what I'm going to do is let's add another page and let's work through that together. So to do that piece of it, I'm actually letting f of x equal 0. And what I need to do then is realize that x minus 1 squared means x minus 1, x minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and FOIL this to get x squared minus 2x plus 1, and I'm going to bring down that minus 3 that was still sitting there. So x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to look to see if it can be factored, and if not, I'll use quadratic formula. So are there two numbers, since my leading coefficient's a 1, that multiply to give me negative 2, and when they add them gives me also negative 2? The answer to that is no. So in this case, I have to use the quadratic formula, which remember, you need to have memorized. So I'm going to plug into negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the opposite of b is 2, plus or minus b squared in this case is 4, minus 4 times 1 times negative 2, all over 2 times 1. So we've got 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, and then 4 times negative 2 becomes negative 8. So that's plus 8 all over 2, or 2 plus or minus the square root of 12 all over 2. Now, in this case, guys, if I'm asking you to graph something like this on the test, then of course I'm going to expect that you use a calculator and get a decimal approximation for this. So you're going to go ahead and plot those 2 points. There's 2 of them because one is 2 plus the square root of 12 over 2, and the other is 2 minus the square root of 12 over 2. Be careful if I do this on the test that you hit your enter button after you put this numerator in, or it's only going to divide the square root of 12 by 2 rather than the entire numerator. And that may actually even come up a little bit in MyLabs Plus, so probably a good thing for you to check on. Those are the points that I'd then be looking for on your graph. Here's another example. This one is not in vertex form. So to get the vertex, we're going to have to do negative b over 2a. So the opposite of b is 4, divided by 2, a is 1, so I get 2 as the x-coordinate of the vertex. I'm going to plug that back in. So I get 4 minus 8 plus 6, or negative 4 plus 6, which is also 2. So my vertex is at the point 2, 2. That means my axis of symmetry, remember it's always going to be a line, so x equals, and then I look at the x-coordinate here and I put it right there. And then I've got to find intercepts. So I'll find the y-intercepts first, because that one's always the easier one because I'm just plugging in 0 for x. So I'm going to do 0 squared minus 4 times 0 plus 6, so that's just 6. And then I've got to set this equal to 0, because now I'm going to let y be 0 to get the x-intercepts. And again, I'm either going to factor it or I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So in this case, I'm going to say, are there two numbers that when I multiply, they give me 6, and when I add them, they give me -4? And the answer to that is no. So this is another example where we would have to use the quadratic formula for this piece, and we would have some decimal answers. I'm not going to do that piece of it for this problem because I want you to go back now, do the ones in MyLabs Plus, and that's the process you're going to go through for every single one of your graphing problems. So you need to look for very specific things for a graph. You need the vertex. You need the axis of symmetry. You need the x-intercepts, which you find by letting y equal 0, and the y-intercepts, which you're going to find by letting x equals 0. Okay, and again, sometimes these here, especially, could be decimals. Don't let that freak you out on the test. The last item that you asked me to show you in the video was finding the vertex by completing the square. So in class we said go ahead and let f of x be y. And then we said take that constant and move it over to the other side. And so to move it, we'd have to subtract it from both sides. So we've got y minus 2 equals x squared minus 4x. Your next step is to take this middle term, divide it by 2, and square it. So I've got 4, or -4 rather, it doesn't matter how you think of it because I'm going to square it, divided by 2, which is going to give me -2, and then when I square that, I get 4. So now I'm going to add 4 to both sides. On the left-hand side, I get y plus 2. On the right-hand side, I get something that now can be factored. That's the goal. So I'm going to factor this to be x minus 2, and remember guys, that's the same as x minus 2 squared. So I get y plus 2 equals x minus 2 squared, and then I can just move my 2 back, and now it's in vertex form. So this vertex is at the point 2, -2, and I'm looking at that straight from vertex form. So hopefully this will give you something to look back to as you work through your review and your homework in MyLabs Plus. I'll see you Sunday night if any of you need extra help. And relax, you will be fine on Tuesday. Do that review lots of times. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.